The Mesonet stands for Meso or Medium Scale Automated Weather Networks, and we have over 60 across the state right now. You can find the information at mesonet.ksu.edu, and you can click on the particular location that's closest to your location. It will give you information about temperature. It will give you the heat index. It will give you the wind speed and direction, the relative humidity, and an outlook of what conditions might be. You can also go into various points and look at historical data, or you can look at growing degree units. So if you've got a crop out there, you've got a garden going, or if you've got an insect pest that you're worrying about, you can find information about how quickly those might be developing as well.
The Weather Data Library, part of Kansas State University's Department of Agronomy and home to the Office of the State Climatologist and Kansas Mesonet, serves as a repository of information about the weather and climate of Kansas. In addition to collecting weather data, the staff provides weather safety education and how to become more involved in collecting local data. On today's Sound Living, a more comprehensive weather picture. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman. Assistant State Climatologist Mary Knapp, who produces Weather Wonders, a weekly series on all things weather-related, explains how Kansas Mesonet and volunteers collect weather data, how anyone can access that information, and how it provides an historical picture of weather events across the state. Mary, in addition to tornado and severe thunderstorm safety, lightning safety that we've already covered, we wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that we're coming up on the hotter part of the summer. And as we do that, there are some things we need to keep in mind really for personal safety. And I know one of those starts with just skin protection, and that involves sunscreen.
Right. What you want to do is check the SPF, or the sun protection factor, of that sunscreen. And the higher that you can get that, the better. The other thing to keep in mind is be sure you apply that before you go out so that your skin has time to absorb that and develop the protective layer that you're interested in. It's also a good idea to repeat the application throughout the day, as that will tend to wear off. Another thing to keep in mind with sun protection is avoid the time when the sun is highest in the sky, so over the noon hour. That will have the additional benefit of protecting you a little bit from the hotter temperatures. But the hottest temperatures are actually a little bit after the time that you have the peak sun in the sky. It's as you're getting towards the later afternoon, typically between 3 and 6 p.m.
In addition to protecting our skin, we also need to protect ourselves because we dehydrate quickly. Heat stress is certainly something that will happen this summer.
Right, and there are a couple of things you want to consider. One is keep in mind that you need to start your hydration process throughout the day. And so when you're getting ready to go for an afternoon boating or biking, make sure that you've hydrated yourself through the night and into the morning before you start your outdoor activities. Be sure that you have water available throughout the day and continue to drink as needed. Once you feel thirsty, you're actually well on your way to dehydration. Children and older adults may be less aware of their dehydration. That can be particularly difficult with children, as they may not be able to vocalize that they are thirsty or that they are feeling uncomfortable and dehydrated. So you'll need to watch that as well.
Are there some signs then that we might be experiencing heat stress?
Yes, you might start sweating profusely, be dizzy, be uncomfortable. That's an indication that you're approaching that. You might get heat cramps where your muscles start cramping up. Again, a more severe indication of heat stress. The really dangerous point is if you stop sweating, because then it's a sign that your system is completely overloaded, and it's an indication that you need emergency attention. So look for venues where you can get out of the heat if needed. Shaded park areas, maybe the open area of a mall where you can walk and still maintain that social distancing but be in a cooler atmosphere. Not everybody has access to air conditioning that we've taken for granted, so you need to look at alternate ways of reaching a cooler environment. The other thing is to plan on doing any of the intensive activities very early in the morning before the heat has a chance to build up, and later in the evening, the 7-8 time frame rather than after 5 o'clock when you get off work, because that 5 o'clock hour may be actually the hottest part of the day.
Also wanted to cover a couple of other things that people might be interested in. Mesonet is something that they can get involved with. They can go to that site and find a lot of information. Another way to get involved is through CocoRoss. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, what it stands for and what the primary purpose is.
Okay, let's talk first about the Mesonet. So the Mesonet stands for Meso or Medium Scale Automated Weather Networks, and we have over 60 across the state right now. You can find the information at mesonet.ksu.edu, and you can click on the particular location that's closest to your location. It will give you information about temperature. It will give you the heat index. It will give you the wind speed and direction, the relative humidity, and an outlook of what conditions might be. You can also go into various points and look at historical data, or you can look at growing degree units. So if you've got a crop out there, you've got a garden going, or if you've got an insect pest that you're worrying about, you can find information about how quickly those might be developing as well.
Was that originally set up for agricultural producers, or did it just have kind of a statewide effect?
It was originally started around 1985 and 86 at the Kansas State Research and Extension sites, particularly the research fields. So it did have mainly an agricultural bent, but it always had a component that was across disciplines. So not just agriculture, but also in the urban environment where you might be looking at water demands and other factors. Since then, we've expanded. And we've also added additional measurements. So barometric pressure is measured. Wind and temperature are measured at 2 different heights on our towers. And we're gradually migrating all of our legacy tripods into towers. Also has soil temperature and it has soil moisture. One of the more unique measurements is the solar radiation. That measures how much incoming energy is being produced from the sun. And then it's useful in a number of different ways. It's used in evapotranspiration calculations, but it also can be used to look at the efficiency of, say, a solar panel that you might be contemplating putting out in your area.
And this is all gathered electronically?
It's all gathered electronically. It is retrieved from the station via cellular modems and then archived at Kansas State University in the Department of Agronomy and the Weather Data Library. So we can go back in time and look at, all right, this was a pretty bad year. What was it like 10 years ago? Or what were the conditions under a particular circumstance?
So then the CocoRoss is done by volunteers across the state.
Right. The electronic system and all of the instrumentation that goes with a Mesonet tower is extremely expensive, and it is also very labor-intensive to make sure that it's maintained well. You have to replace the bearings on the anemometer. You have to clear the debris in the rain gauges. So there's a lot of work that goes in with it. Because of the expense, it's difficult to have them everywhere you might want them, particularly when you're looking at rainfall, because rainfall can literally vary from one side of the street to the other. A siphon tipping bucket rain gauge that might be deployed on an automated weather station costs around $1,500. A CocoRoss gauge, which is a manual gauge, costs between $20 and $40. So you can get a lot of CocoRoss gauges for what it would cost for just one of the automated gauges. CocoRoss stands for Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. It was started in Colorado after the big Fort Collins flood in the 1990s. Nolan Duskin, who was the state climatologist at Colorado at that time, did a survey after the flood to check and see what was the rainfall rate that created such devastation. Turns out the heaviest rains were in the foothills of the mountains. The one gauge that was in that location was broken, and so they weren't getting the warning of the intense rains that fell. We had a similar incident in Manhattan when we had our Labor Day flood. The rains in Manhattan itself were fairly dramatic, 2-3 inches, but it turns out that the heaviest rainfall in the event was captured at a Cocoras gauge in northern Riley County, where they had 11 inches of rain. So by deploying those additional gauges and getting people to make those observations, we could get a better picture of what exactly was happening with the storm. The other thing with using the Cocoras network is that it can help validate radar rainfall estimates, because there are plenty of people who've gone out and they've looked at the radar and they've seen a green splotch that indicates, oh, it's raining in your area. And you look outside and you're going, no, it's not raining here. That's because the radar beam catches the clouds higher above the surface. And so that rain may evaporate before it ever makes it to the ground. Having those Cocoras gauges out there helps validate whether or not it actually made it there.
How many gauges do we have right now, and do you feel like we've got room for more?
We have over 700 that are actively reporting at the current time, and ideally we might have one on every block just to capture the differences that a storm might produce across the state. So if people are interested, it's a very good way to get involved in monitoring the weather. You use a standard gauge. You can't use just any gauge. You need to use a Cocoras gauge. The reason for that is calibration between units can be very, very difficult. You may think of, well, I can go out and get the rain gauge at my local garden store, and it's $2 and it measures 5 inches of rain. Well, we've done a couple of calibration checks, and they can vary as much as 25 or 30%, even though they're marked as being a 5-inch gauge. With the Cocoras gauge, they have very precise manufacturing standards, and that gauge was calibrated very closely to the National Weather Service official 8-inch gauge, so they know that the measurements are comparable and are accurate.
Is there a certain location where it needs to be placed?
What you want to do is make it in an open area, splitting the difference between obstacles. Some people will put it out on their mailbox, generally an open area and a place where they can see it readily and note that it's time to go and check and empty the gauge.
And how do they then relay that information to you?
With the Cocoras, there is a website where you can go and enter that data. That data is then archived at the Cocoras headquarters in Colorado. It's available for anyone who wants to take a look at it. So even if you don't sign up to become a volunteer, check out the website. You can see the tutorials on how rain is measured, what the rainfall is around the country, and not just in the U.S., because we have observers in Canada and in the Bahamas. One of the things that we constantly try and remind our participants and observers is to report the zeros. In the western parts of Kansas, they have not seen the rainfalls that have plagued southeastern Kansas, and so you may want to check and see how many days has it been since Elkhart has seen rain. And finally, there is an option for a condition report, where you generally describe what is happening in the environment around you. Ideally, you would do that on a weekly basis, whether it's nice and lush as it is right now, whether it's flooding or whether it's drought. Doing that on a regular basis helps track how the climate is changing.
And again, how can they find all of this information?
For the Mesonet, it's mesonet.ksu.edu. And for Cocoras, it's cocorahs.org.
That's Assistant State Climatologist Mary Knapp with information to help avoid heat-related problems this summer using Kansas Mesonet and how to become a Cocoa Roz volunteer. Sound Living is a weekly public affairs program produced by Research and Extension at Kansas State University. I'm Jeff Wichman, and this is the K-State Radio Network.